This podcast is for you. Your co-hosts, Ben Dodge and Eric Huso at Effect Epic Consulting, believe that your potential is limitless. Tapping into this potential is how you can affect epic results in your life, relationships, and business. Welcome to the Principles of Epic Growth.
Good morning, brother.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I beat you to it.
Good morning. Man, today's topic is hard for me.
It's good for us.
It is definitely good for us, but it's hard for me.
We can do hard things.
That's right. Today, Eric and I are going to discuss how these principles that we teach and coach on in Effect Epic, how they apply to the concept of millennials.
Super important because they are a huge part of the workforce today, and even more in the next 5 years. So 5 years from now, they're projected to be like 3/4 of the whole workforce. So as a leader, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, being able to lead them, inspire them is going to be critical for your success in putting together incredible teams that get results.
So for context purposes, we'll give you some of the information that we learned, and just prep for this, is that if you are born roughly in the decade after 1983, and then you are considered a millennial, and you've been branded by this world and society as one of the most entitled and self-absorbed, set of humans in human history.
Yeah,
millennials.
And we're going to take a different angle at that. And when you hear the millennial, probably the first thing you think of is that selfish, self-absorbed, entitled person, right?
Right.
But we're going to look at a different angle. We're going to look at what they can teach us. So, I've been involved teaching these kids for the last 20 years. And now it's fun when I see my students from 20 years ago that are in the workforce and doing great things in the world. And so I kind of have a unique advantage, as even though I'm not millennial, I missed that by 10 years, but I've been around them and teaching them and being with them, coaching them, etc., for the last 20 years. So a lot of what frustrates us about the millennials really is not their fault. They're born into a society that had some incredible gifts and advances, and that also, the way they were parented, so many people during that time coddled and enabled and helicoptered, and they're the product of their generation. And so rather than label them with a fixed mindset thing that, they're this or that, let's look at the great things that they can teach us, because on the other hand, they have given us a great gift. They have given us a gift that if we'll open up our eyes, we'll be able to see some things that would enrich our own lives.
Yeah, and this is important as employers, as parents, as older mentors in the society, that we really understand how millennials work, and that we can understand the way they tick, because they are so different. In a lot of ways, they're just different than their paradigms, their perspectives, the way they view things are different than the way some of us view things. And so you can really engage in or encounter quite a bit of conflict without understanding or trying to relate with them and get their side of things. And that conflict is just unproductive, right? It doesn't help you, it doesn't help your business, it doesn't help your family if you're parenting them. So a lot of these principles we'll discuss today as they relate to millennials will really help kind of all the way around. So
yeah. It's important that you brought up that idea of the paradigm, because there's 7 billion people on the earth, 8 billion people on the earth, there's 8 billion different paradigms. And for us to make an assumption, even if I have an identical twin that had the vast majority of the same experiences that I had growing up, if I have an assumption that they have an identical paradigm that I have, then I'm not going to connect, I'm not going to relate with that person. Now you take that a step further and you add a generation in there where we just see the world differently. If we don't acknowledge the fact that we have different paradigms, we'll never connect, we'll never relate. And so if you want to change a relationship with someone, you have to change your context. That's the only way to change a relationship, is to change your context and do some work to see the world through their eyes. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is some of those principles that will help us to see the world through their eyes, that will help us connect and relate to them and lead them.
Right, because it's only, look, I'm going to just say it, it's only getting worse. So, this decade or two after 1983, when millennials were born, I mean, there's kids being born still in conditions that are the same or worse. And so, this entitlement, victim mentality, participation medal, culture that millennials were born into and raised in is still here. It's so regardless of the end date on when the technicality, or the technical definition of millennials exists, regardless of that, the circumstances under which we breed kids, in our world today, they still exist. The millennial culture, so to speak, is still here, if not worse. And so we really do need to understand how to interact on a level and relate with them and motivate, encourage, employ, parent, whatever, these kids, this generation. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So let's talk about some things that we can do. Number one, that we can learn from millennials. Number two, things that we can do to lead them, whether they're in our home or they're in the workplace. So one of the things that millennials really attach to is they like to do things that they feel are meaningful, that they feel have purpose, that they can get behind. Social causes are a huge thing, and so they want to do something where they can feel like they're making a difference.
Yeah, I'm just shaking my head a little bit, because sometimes it doesn't matter whether you're making a difference. You just got to get the job done. But I understand that's the thing. I understand what you're saying. This podcast will be interesting for the two of us. You have kids that are millennials,
yeah.
And you've raised some, and in some of your other work, you're actively engaged, with teenagers all the time, and so as an employer, with a couple of companies here in town, I've had my own dealings with millennials, and they haven't always been positive. And so it's funny as you say that, because they yearn for meaning in almost anything they do. Mm-hmm. They really do. And by the way, who doesn't? Right? Who doesn't? For me, when I just hear that, though, it's not nails on the chalkboard. It's not. But what I hear is where is the disconnect in their own ability to find meaning in something that they don't think is meaningful? It reeks to me sometimes of the participation medal culture of oh, well, we've got to come up with some kind of meaning for them to be able to get them to actively engage in this. Whereas I think some of the older school people will understand a meaning there and get the work done. And sometimes that meaning is, this job just really needs to be done because my family's, food on the table is important. And that's the struggle sometimes is are we, I mean, I'm sure you're not suggesting this, Eric, but are we supposed to create these, facades, so to speak, meanings that we can, we need the filing done today, right? We need the filing done today. And so now I have to have a conversation with some of my employees and come up with a meaningful purpose behind why the filing is being done, so that they can get the filing done enthusiastically and passionately. You see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
That's just not going to happen, right? That's, hopefully we can do, as parents, mentors, employers, a better job of instilling some of the principles of, hard work and ethic and some of those other things, where there's duty, there's things getting done, and the meaning there is your own integrity, your own honor, your own word is on the line when you commit to doing something. And how powerful is that meaning versus we're saving the whales today, or, I get it. I get that they want meaning in what they do, and we're going to get some of these other ones, they have to be passionate about what they do, and they don't want to be like their dads and grandpas who, endlessly punched the clock all day long and came home grumpy and just drank all night, and so they want something better at work. I totally get that. Me too. I don't want, just punch the clock all day long and come home angry. I'm with it, so I can relate to what they want, but yeah. Anyways, I have a hard time finding, a purpose in. Yeah, my job now as an employer is to come up with a meaningful reason why they need to do what they need to do.
Yeah. So what you can do to do that, you touched on a couple of things. There's a couple of principles in there. Anytime you accomplish something, there's satisfaction in it, right? Even something that feels meaningless, when you've finished something and you've done it well, you can look back and there's a sense of accomplishment there. Anytime you bring home, if you're a young father and you're bringing home the bacon for the kids, if you're a working mom and you're coming home and you're bringing home, you've accomplished something great. There's great satisfaction in that.
But that's the very kind of satisfaction that I think you're suggesting they don't get. They need something meaningful beyond that.
They need to connect. They need to connect what they're doing at work with the results of that.
And particularly with a social impact, right?
Yeah.
Is what we talked about.
Yeah.
So where's this, you know what I mean? Like that sounds like, let's save the whales today, or let's prevent this, Amazonian, rainforest from being destroyed by some builder, and let's, bring refugees in, and like it just feels more like that's the kind of meaning they're looking for, and they overlook the fact that, yeah, there's integrity and honor and meaning in just bringing food home sometimes, because that's what your family needs. Like the responsibility part, and this is where I think millennials get a bad rap, is they're not pegged as being a responsible group of people. They're just not. They're pegged as being a self-absorbent group of people. But they are responsible, but only if it's something that they're passionate in, there's something that they find meaning in. And so that's the disconnect that I have a problem with. How can we teach them that there's meaning in things beyond saving the whales?
Yeah. So if, as a leader, I'm going to go back to what you mentioned earlier, if you can teach them about integrity. And now there's a danger in teaching about integrity. And we've talked about that you don't want to become the integrity police. But as you are the demonstration of integrity, and integrity is more than a value that's just painted on the wall, but it really drives everything that you do, and you create that culture of integrity. And you're with your people where you're having conversations about what they're committed to, what they're giving their word to. To me, there's nothing more satisfying than the feeling of having given my word and kept my word. Like, that's a powerful feeling that really can give meaning to anything that I do, whatever it is, whether it's a remedial task or something grandiose that we've talked about. There's just something powerful about having given your word and kept your word and being a person to be counted on.
So it starts in the home, in my opinion. Like that, as parents, we're failing if we're not teaching those things to our kids. Because as an employer, I'll tell you right now, the person who doesn't have that, and my interview and hiring process is really unique, because I'm on purpose asking questions that solicit responses that will indicate to me whether or not they're a person of integrity, and whether or not they're entitled, and whether or not they're a victim, and so forth. And I'm not going to spend the time as an employer to teach those. I'll demonstrate them because that's how I live my life. But I won't spend the time hiring somebody and then teaching all those things, hoping that they'll turn out to be a good employee. If they don't come to the table with that, they can go on. They can move. So this is where millennials are a little bit handicapped. They might be gifted with all of their 10 digits and their fingers and IT stuff and phones and programs and whatever. Okay, great, but that not all companies are IT related, right? And even if so, what are you going to do with that whole sense of entitlement and whatever mentality? I think those entities and organizations still struggle with this. As an employer that does something other than IT, if you're not coming to the table already with a sense of responsibility and that you can find meaning in just keeping your word, then you're not someone that I'll ever consider hiring, period. And that doesn't matter what age that person is, by the way, But yeah, so I just went through a hiring process and hired a couple of people in the last month or two, and same thing. They're all millennials, and none of them have the millennial mindset. So, and in my experience, and maybe we're jumping ahead, but in my experience, based on after talking with these girls, extensively and doing working interviews, even bringing them in and like just having a look, see, hey, is this good for you? Is this good for us? Right? They both get to test us out. We get to test them out. What I experienced is in their families, they were required as kids to like save money for college and pay for their own school. look, I'm not saying that as parents you have to make your kids pay for school, but I am implying heavily that there's huge value there. See, as parents, we feel like, well, school's so important, like, why not let's just take care of that for them so that they can at least go. The principle is if it's worth getting, it's worth letting your kid make all the sacrifices to get there.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever that is, whether it's a car, a driver's license, gasoline for the car for date night, or college even, or whatever it is. Like, the more we let and help and encourage our kids to create those things for themselves, as opposed to hand them to them with the expectation that they study hard and do well, otherwise we're not paying, that kind of stuff. Anyways, both of these girls went through similar experiences, all the way down to, for example, paying for college on their own and some other things. And they just coincidentally, in my opinion, no coincidence, but coincidentally, they don't have this entitlement mindset and some of these other things, because their whole life they've had to, sometimes even buy their own clothes, right? Like, not that that's not like, as parents we should just go all, Nazi on them and stuff, but yeah, it's so, look, I jumped ahead, but I feel like in the home is where this starts. If we're going to teach kids to connect to their own integrity, if millennials suffer from a disconnect there, in other words, if the meaning has to be beyond save the whales, then we have to teach them the powerful meaning of integrity, authenticity, honoring your word, and some of these things in the home, so that they can feel that, yeah, maybe they don't want to go be a coal miner all day, and maybe they really do want to save the whales, great, but remember that there's passion and honor and integrity and honoring your word and meaning there, that can connect to all of us, because they're not alone. Every single one of us wants meaning. Every single one of us wants to be part of something meaningful.
Yeah.
No one wants to just drudgingly go to work, punch a clock, and go home. They just have the courage, to their credit, to actually voice some of that and try and make changes about it. So I do respect that. It's just that disconnect sometimes of, if it's not saving the whales, I'm not interested. Okay, well then you can go somewhere else. I'm going to find the guy that can figure out that difference, and
So I'm gonna add to that. So in mine, my experience is I've been more of teaching. So whether it's my students or my faculty or team, that's teaching is a huge part. So I can't say, if you don't have this set, then I don't have time for you. I'm going to look for somebody else, because I have to take everybody who comes, right? When 36 kids walk into a classroom, I can't say, you 10, you weren't taught, I don't have time for you. So I've had to teach from the very beginning.
That's a really good point.
And so that's my paradigm, that's my mindset, is that it's my responsibility to teach them. So we can teach, and the best way to teach and connect on this is to have real authentic conversations where we ask them questions about what they're committed to. We really find out what their goals are, what they're committed to, and we hear that without judging them, where we don't say, well, that's the stupidest thing, that's a pipe dream for you to think that you're going to be able to go do that. You need to go get a real job and put it. That's kind of the typical conversations, and that's why lots of teenagers feel like they don't connect with their parents, or my parents don't hear me. They don't understand me. They don't get me. But if we'll just have those real authentic conversations about what they're committed to, we will hear things in the things that they say that we'll be able to then coach them and encourage them and give them opportunities to make commitments around those things, and then to demonstrate integrity that we talked about, where they can give their word to something and keep their word. And you've given some great examples of the people that you hired, where those girls were committed to something special about getting their education, and they gave their word, and they worked hard, and they accomplished it, and they reap the rewards. That's what happens when you give your word to something. You're committed to something, and you do it. There's just a power in that, and they carry themselves differently, and they stood out in the crowd of all the people that you hired.
Right, they experienced integrity.
Mm-hmm.
They experienced keeping their word. They experienced meaningful, sacrifice and hard work. They experienced that, and that's the difference. So as an educator and a parent, you come from a very good perspective there of a duty and really a social obligation to try and instill these principles. But you can't put them up on a chalkboard.
No, you've got to demonstrate it.
You have to create those experiences for them. Those kids have to experience that, and that's what you described.
That's one thing. One thing that they have a really good knack for is they can sniff out inauthenticity. Like if you put it up on the chalkboard, but you don't demonstrate it, they will sniff it out.
That's right.
They'll sniff out a fraud. There's no charlatans. They figure it out.
Yeah. So parents, listen up. What Eric was talking about was huge. You really need to create these experiences for your kids. You need to have authentic conversations with them, is what he said. Authentic conversations, listen to them, hear them without judgment, what their goals are, what they want to commit to, and then take it to the next level, like he said. Have the fortitude and the interest to. Sorry, that's my dog in the background.
Hey, Bucky.
You have to have the interest to take it to the next level, to help them create a commitment around one of those things that they want to do, and then follow through with their commitment so that they experience what it's like to follow through on a commitment. And then they start experiencing integrity, and they find joy in it, because we all do. That's what's incredible, right? Like everyone loves that. It's almost like setting a goal and achieving it. It's different, but it's similar to that. There's just a lot of satisfaction and personal gain and joy, and and all kinds of stuff there. So as a parent, you have to intentionally create that, and you can't do that without authentically having conversations and authentically knowing what they want to do, and then taking the next thought process and physical process to create commitments and agreements around those things, and then help oversee, watch, and when they follow through, then you praise and reward, as opposed to let's go sign up for Little League, whatever. You are last place, and you get a big trophy. Well done, good job. You know what I'm saying? Like you're basically getting praise for doing nothing, for showing up, for just being a part of it.
Yeah.
And that might be okay if you were authentic in the fact that you're not telling them they did a good job, but you're telling them that it was nice of you to show up. Okay, great. But we're often telling them they actually did a good job playing that game when they didn't. I mean, I'm not saying you got to be a jerk as a parent, but you should be authentic. Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, thanks for showing up today. You did something that other people weren't willing to do. They're at home sitting on the couch, but you showed up. Even though you're last place, at least you showed up. Thanks for showing up. That is a world of difference, instead of saying you did a really good job. Way to hit that home run that you never hit.
Let me give an example. So, you mentioned that I've raised a couple millennials. So my oldest son, born in 1996, he's going to get married here in 2 months, and just so proud of him. But, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been times where he's really frustrated me. And we've butted heads. He's really headstrong, and when I was, one of the biggest mistakes that I made as a parent was I took the mindset of, well, when I was your age, I was doing this. When I was your age, I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning, and I started work at 5, and I was in the trailer park hoeing weeds and doing concrete and all this, all that. And why aren't you doing more than what you're doing? Because when I was your age, I was working much harder than you. And so that mindset that I had, that context, that way of being that I had, put a wedge between us where we didn't relate and we didn't connect. And I own that. And it caused a diminished relationship. Well, over the past year, as I'm different today than I was 5 years ago. I'm a more effective parent, I'm a more effective leader, etc. There's been some things where I've been frustrated with him, and I have handled it differently. Where I've done these things that we're talking about, where I've listened to him, I've asked him questions, and I've encouraged him to read this book or do that, and a year ago he's like, no, he wouldn't do it. But over time of me practicing these things that we're just talking about here, so I'll just give you an example. So last night, 10:30, I'm getting ready for bed. I get called into the family room, and he has 10 questions for me. He's starting a couple businesses right now, and He's just on fire. He's passionate, working hard. He's 5 o'clock this morning. I'm getting ready to go on a bike ride, and he's out the door going to work and doing this pool business that he's got going. And last night he's like, Dad, tell me about this. And what audiobook should I listen to about this financial topic that he had a question on? And so by practicing these principles, they do come around. They do come around. But if I would have a year ago said, listen, this is the way it is, and this is the way you're going to be, and as long as you're under my roof, these are the rules, and this is what you're going to do, he wouldn't be where he's at today. But because I coached him, I listened to him, I related to him, I gave him opportunities to give his word to things, to demonstrate integrity, to demonstrate commitment, now he's on fire, and there's nothing that's going to stop this kid.
That's right. So I remember a conversation I had with him as well. And I don't know that it made a difference per se, but I remember in a relatable way, because he's classic millennial, right? In a relatable way, we were in your kitchen once, and this was at a time period where he wasn't getting up early and working, right? Mm-hmm. He was mostly just goofing off with friends, yep, day in and day out, right? And I know him, and I know that he wants to make a bunch of money. Like, that's what he wants. He wants a lifestyle, and a bunch of money, and he's really willing to do a lot for it. And so I remember having a conversation with him, and I was like, how are you going to do that goofing off with your friends? I was like, I don't know about you, but I got friends from high school that are still just like scraping by paycheck to paycheck. All they did was goof off with each other, and they never really committed to anything. They never made it. And I was like, I don't know about you, but I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that kind of money. I'm going to work now so that I can forever have like the kind of lifestyle and playful, whatever that I want. And it was a longer conversation than that, but I remember seeing little light bulbs go off in his head. And sometimes with millennials, it's like you say, Eric, you just take some patience a little bit. They'll come around if you demonstrate these principles. And part of that is having conversations with, well, if you know what they want and they authentically want it, then it's okay to call it out. Like, dude, you're not going to get that doing this. And then kind of you present them with the choice. Continue being a goof off, or turn it on, man. Like, you've got gifts, you've got abilities, and you've got opportunities. Like, take them, run with them. Make all the money in the world, and your friends can just watch you and wonder how. You present them with that choice, and then they're empowered by their own decision.
Yeah.
Right.
You also bring up something else where, because they've been given the participation ribbon their whole life, they haven't really been held accountable as much as previous generations. When somebody truly cares about them and gives it to them straight, they appreciate it. Like they're like, it's like, like the light bulb goes on, like you mentioned. When somebody truly cares about them and gives it to them straight, they love it.
And it's out of love. It's not out of like a condemnation, dang you millennial guy. It's
right.
Like, I love him. I know, obviously I know all your kids well, and I love him. And I'm like, I'm just looking at him wasting. At that time, he was wasting his life away, right? He's not now. He's on fire. But at that time, there was just a few months there where he was just goofing off all the time, and I was like, he is wasting him. He's got so many gifts, right? And and it was just out of love. It was one of those conversations where it was like, dude, you can do more. Like, you just have to choose to.
Yeah.
And here's what you can do. And for me in my house, so to speak, I choose to work my butt off and make as much money as possible right now while I still can while I'm young. And then I'll retire young. And that's what he wanted too, but he wasn't doing anything about it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of called him out on it, like, well, you're not doing anything about it. Like, you can choose though. Like, dude, you can do this. Like, let's do it, man. And I got your back. You want to do it? Like, I'll help you do it. If you don't want to do it, well, I'm not gonna like sit around and participate in the wastefulness. You can be on your own. Like, yeah. Good luck, kind of thing.
One of the things that we can also do is create a really powerful culture, a culture that, you mentioned earlier, Ben, I don't have time to teach. You don't necessarily have to take the time to teach when you got the right culture.
That's right.
Your culture can be an incredible mentor for people. And so if you go back and listen to our podcast on culture, we spent a whole podcast on culture, on how to create that powerful culture.
That's right.
Go back and listen to that for specific details on how to create that powerful culture. But if you get your culture right, your culture will mentor, your culture will teach.
Yeah, and I should say, we don't expect perfection out of employees, right? I mean, they're humans. At least I don't. Like, I get that they're humans, and they're going to have, in fact, every day. But one of the things so I have staff meetings every morning with my whole office, and they're 15 to 20 minutes, and we go through, some of these principles, actually, these leadership principles we'll go through for a few minutes, and then I'll check in with them one-on-one in front of everybody to make sure that if there's anything that they have on their, desk or docket that we can all help with as a team. Calendar conflicts, and we just kind of discuss everything every day. It's awesome. But I don't expect that they're perfect. So in one of these recent meetings, I mentioned to them, I was like, I don't expect that you guys are perfect, but I do expect that you show up every day better than you were the day before. With not beating around the bush at all about the fact that I expect them to learn and to grow and to adapt, and that there's a lot of resources available to them in this world and in my own office that can help them be better people and better employees. And if they're not showing up better today than they were the day before, then I'll find somebody else who can. And I told them that, like, I love you all, but at the end of the day, like, I'm going to put somebody in your spot that's willing to be better today than they were the day before. I mean, I just said it. That's how it is. And the cool thing about all of my staff right now, 100% of them, is they're all committed to that. And so that culture is really nice because it fosters that growth. Growth
in all areas.
So there is teaching and there is demonstrating. But what I mentioned before earlier in this podcast is I'm not the educator and I'm not their parent. So the basic level of, hey, here's integrity and this is what it is, and here's what it means to honor your word and so forth. If they don't come to the table with some of those principles, and this is where we are very obligated as parents, if we want to help our society and we want to help our millennials actually get jobs and do well, then we need to allow them to use their gifts for sure, because they come gifted. Every generation comes better than the generation before, and we'll go into that maybe in just a second. But we also need to take the time as parents to help them understand principles like commitment, authenticity, integrity. Because if they don't have those, then they're not working for me. And I think a lot of employers, and wherever they get a job, they'll just burn through all these little jobs over and over again and constantly live at home. Let's be honest. How many millennials are still at home?
Yeah.
That's terrible. I mean, look, let's not compare, but when I got
Oh, you're gonna.
I'm gonna do it. All right. Look, when high school was over, I was out. Like, let's go. Let's find a job and let's go live somewhere. And it was that way for my whole life. So, but that's because I wanted to do something. What I wanted to create for myself wasn't living at home, at least not long term by any means. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So, yeah. So, anyways, as parents, if you want that empty nest freedom, then teach your kids these principles now, so that when they're older, they'll spread their wings and they'll actually fly.
So fun. So fun. Okay. Well, wrapping this up. Important that, number one, we recognize that we have a paradigm. We have a context that's driving us personally, that is, causing us to see people in a certain way, and that drives our behavior, that drives how they experience us. And so if we're going to change a relationship, we have to change that paradigm. We have to change that context. We have to be willing to connect with them and to find out what they're committed to, relate with them around that without judging them. And we also have to be a demonstration of the things that we are committed to. Like, we can't expect a generation to have integrity if we're not demonstrating integrity ourselves.
That's right. That's totally hypocritical, and it will never work. And they'll sniff it out, like you said.
And then see all the great things that they are. Their commitment to causes greater than themselves. Their desire for work-life balance. Their desire to, really be all in certain things beyond the grind.
Yeah. So on that note, real quick, like the desire to have work-life balance. How can you fault them for that when they just want something that you never had, right? They see what it's like to live in the household of somebody who doesn't have work-life balance, or they see what it's like to work in the household of somebody
grudgingly punches a clock every day and lives paycheck to paycheck. So just because they want more than that isn't bad at all, guys.
Yeah.
Like don't be careful in the judgment there. Millennials, they see stuff and they want more, and that's okay.
This morning when I was riding my bike, I was thinking about our podcast today, and there was 2 words that came up that really contrast the millennial generation versus the prior generation. And the prior generation focuses on life experience. Like that's a big deal, I have all this life experience, and so you should listen to me because I have all this life experience. And the millennial generation has those 2 words flopped. Experience life. There's more to life than just the drudgery. Experience life. And so both of those 2 words are valuable. Life experience and experience life. And we can both learn from each other. You put those 2 together, then you have the epic life that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, that makes me a tweener. I'm a tweener. I'm between. Really, I love that. To experience life is something that I try to intentionally do, and by measurement and definition, I'm very much so millennial under that mindset. And then, of course, I'm very old school in the sense that I think life experience is huge. I love it. Yeah. Anyways, look, no matter how we feel about millennials, and sometimes it has a negative context, hopefully what we discussed today will help you relate better to them and see that their potential is incredible. I mean, every generation is born better than the one before it. Just think about your parents and how when you were a teenager, they probably thought you were just, the trashiest generation ever, wasting time with whatever you're doing. And then, of course, then their parents thought the same thing of them, right? Your grandparents thought that way of your parents as they were probably in the 50s and 60s just cruising, Main Street, getting milkshakes
going to the soda shop.
Just wasting time, right? Like every generation feels that way about the generation after them, right? So just acknowledge that they're incredible, they have lots of gifts, and that we have a role in helping them achieve those.
All right. Great being together today, Ben. Thank you for all our listeners. Keep sending ideas, comments, questions. We're just inspired by the great things that you're doing out there in the world.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Principles of Epic Growth podcast, your path to epic performance and life with incredible growth.